Just even in my life, I tried to just do everything the most efficient way possible.
Because the key now is like you've got to that level, and that's awesome. Let's keep you here.
In CounterStrike, so many of the things are in the timing, right? Sometimes 1 second is way too much.
Because I feel like some of my persona in CounterStrike changed who I was as a person.
Oh, what? Jumping double for gold! Today I'm talking with Joshua Nissan, also known as Steel, one of the players involved in the iBuyPower match-fixing scandal. And as such, his professional career was never the same. He has been banned from any Valve-sponsored or orchestrated tournaments. So it has definitely been something that has impacted his life greatly as a lifelong fan of the game and someone that still wants to compete to this day. But he still stays involved and he still stays a consistent figure in the community, producing entertaining and very educational content on his Twitch or his YouTube, as well as staying active in the professional scene in the tournaments he can play in teams such as Ghost and teams such as Chaos, which he is currently in, and focusing on bringing up aspiring young talent. You may have noticed that I've been speaking not just with players or talent, but others whose expertise serves to push the envelope in our continually developing industry. This is the DDK Show. If you enjoy it, subscribe on YouTube, give it 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, follow on Spotify, or support on patreon.com/DDK eSports, or simply connect with me on Twitter. If you leave a review on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or Twitter, consider mentioning the ideas, people, or topics you find interesting. This is still a side project for me, and the positive support really helps. Without further ado, Steel. Okay, so thanks for joining me, Josh. We've been trying to do this for a while, and I've known you for a long time, and you're someone, I have to say, someone that's perhaps one of the most articulate people I know when it comes to Counter-Strike. So really excited about this. How are things going? Obviously, you just moved to Arizona, so that's a big change, perhaps.
Yeah, things are going all right. We just moved here, which is good. When I was on Ghost last year, I liked being in California because you actually see sunshine. When I was in Toronto, oh man, especially during the winter, it's just like always cloudy. You never see sunlight. It just like completely ruins the mood. And I think this is a good change of scenery and it helps promote a better mood.
Absolutely. Mood is very important to performance, that's for sure. Speaking of which, one of the things I want to kind of get out of the way, I suppose, is I think there's, I don't know if it's really exactly the elephant in the room, but when it comes to you in Counter-Strike, I think it's surprising to a lot of people that you've been so resilient and kind of robust despite the limitations that Valve has kind of set upon you, going all the way back to the betting scandal in 2015. So, but you're still kind of competing in Counter-Strike, and you're doing, I think, what is really very, very good work for the scene, because you're using your wisdom, your experience to bring up a lot of really good players, and you're still competing at a very high level. So what is that kind of process been like for you from start to when it first happened, kind of receiving the ban hammer, as it were, until now? And what are your sort of objectives, realistically? Where do you think things are going to go? Do you have hopes that things will, like the tournaments will, everything will open up a lot more outside of the majors? Where do you stand on all of this?
I had a really competitive itch for like pretty much my entire career, and what had happened was like before I joined iBuyPower, actually, I was taken out of the scene basically not because I wanted to be out of the scene, but because due to circumstances with regards to MTW and their shady practices with the CS team, I kind of landed up, I guess, stranded in England. So I got a full-time job because I needed to, pay rent and eat food. And because I got a full-time job, I had to really dial back on the hours played. So when I started picking up the side gigs of doing the observer work for all the big tournaments, and I saw how big the tournaments were getting, like we had done the EMS1 Katowice major, where Virtus Pro won. So that was like basically my last event. And I actually quit my full-time job to be able to be observer for that, because I'd done a couple of other tournaments before that. I'm like, I really want to do this. And because I worked in an IT team with only so many people, basically what happens is if one person has already booked that time off, you can't also take that time off because the IT team is so small. So I've been trying to book the time off like a month in advance, and I wasn't granted that because my manager's like, no, we can't do that because it's against policy or whatever. So I put my 2 weeks in, 2 weeks before the event. And then iBuyPower came to me afterwards and said, hey, we're making changes. Are you interested? Actually, at the same time, Complexity was also making changes. So I had the opportunities to join either team. And I sometimes do wonder, like, what would have happened if had I taken the other offer to join with, I think it was like Sean Gears, Nothing, Semphis, and I think they were set on also getting Anger at that time. And then I'd be the 5th player for that team. So I sometimes do wonder, like, had I gone down that path instead, what would have kind of been my fate, and where would I have ended up right now? But it's also not healthy to think with like down those lines type of thing. So the scandal happened, we got banned, and I basically felt like I never really scratched that itch. So I stayed in Counter-Strike for a little bit, hoping that, maybe there's like an appeal process. Maybe it's only like a 1-year ban, because when it first happened, it was like, oh, this is indefinite. So we never knew what indefinite meant. It meant like, maybe there's an appeal process. Maybe in a year they'll change the ruling, whatever. After that year, that indefinite became permanent. So that's like, okay, well, maybe we should think about doing other things. But in that time, I had started doing full-time streaming, but I wasn't living like a healthy lifestyle at all. I think a lot of people that do full-time streaming don't really get a chance to live a really balanced and healthy lifestyle. Just the amount of food I was ordering in, or eating like just junk food or restaurant food, as opposed to like actual home cooking. Just because you don't want to take like an hour break out of a stream, like do a 4-hour stream and then turn it off and then come back an hour later after you've done some cooking. So you just order food in. But then you also have these weird hours where, in order to have an audience, for me, it was I would play at weird times during the day or at night, and that would ruin my sleep schedule, and that would also ruin the ability to have social life with people that work 9 to 5 jobs. So that wasn't something that was completely ideal to me, and I saw Overwatch coming up and like, maybe something good can happen here. So I got into Overwatch and competing there just before the game was actually released. So I started when it was still in closed beta, but still pretty late compared to all the other people that switched from Quake and Team Fortress 2 and everything. So I was playing that, and it kind of was what I wanted to do. I wanted to compete, but it wasn't the same as competing in Counter-Strike. Competing in Counter-Strike, like, it's something that I was doing for since 2008, pretty much. I don't know what word I want to use. I don't want to say religiously, but I was competing in basically everything I could compete in, which was mainly Cal, CEVO, and then ESEA. From 2008, I played in every league. I tried to go to as many local lands as possible, even if it's like an 8-9 hour drive. I would do that just so that I could compete in those tournaments, pay out of pocket for the hotels. I would fly to California and in Dallas, where other small local lands as well. So when I'm playing Overwatch, I'm like, okay, it's competing, but I don't know what the direction Blizzard's going with this game. I don't like the meta. I'm not like able to get really good practice. Like in Counter-Strike, you need to work on your aim. You go into a deathmatch. You go into a pistol deathmatch or a rifle deathmatch, or you load up one of the workshop maps like aimbots, or you work on your KZ, or you work on, just like one of those maps where you just have the targets pop up in the wall and you have to work on your flicks. But Overwatch doesn't have that. They don't have like a map where you just go in and you practice your Farah rockets or something like that. So I felt like it took a really long time for me to actually learn things, because I just have to learn by playing either scrims or pubs, and that's not like the best way of doing it. It's such a slow way, and so I felt like it was very difficult for me to actually catch up. But then also, like, Counter-Strike also has things like, you want to play a scrim against another team, here's a custom server. You set up like all the plugins, all the mods. You can just like type a command in like exec LO3 and boom, you're ready to scrim, or exec prac and boom, you're ready to fly around the map with no clip and find all the little neat things that you want to find. But in Overwatch, you don't have that. You have to like go and spend so much time to actually find everything that it was very difficult for me to actually really just fully commit to. And I was always like kind of keeping streaming on the back burner because it's like, well, I don't know for sure how I'm going to do in this game. I don't feel like I'm improving all that much. I feel like there's, I'm not even on like a top 8 team right now, and I feel like I'm holding my team back. And that's not something I ever felt in Counter Strike. So I stopped playing Overwatch. I left that scene. I came back to streaming Counter Strike when Rank S and FPL was about, and because it was a way for me to play Counter Strike and earn money and also compete and get scratch that itch a little bit more. But it wasn't the same as like actually going to LAN events and competing in tournaments in person. And then I was kind of getting bored of it because it's just like you're just playing the same thing online all the time, and just the stress of just like putting on a show for the stream and just streaming these unhealthy hours and playing these unhealthy hours of, oh, when does FPL or Rank S start? 11 p.m. and you finish at like 6 a.m. Cool. Like that's not good for your health either. So when PUBG rolled around, I started playing it. And I actually started really enjoying it, and I also really enjoyed streaming during that period of time because nobody wanted to watch me. So it wasn't like you never feel like this pressure. Something else like there's people watching and you have to do something, or people come in, and especially Counter Strike viewers that know me or know of my history, like people come in just to like explicitly troll, and that is not healthy either. It's just really annoying, and it's not something that I felt welcome to. So when I'm playing PUBG and the people that are still like there watching, it's like those guys are there for me, not for seeing me rage or get upset in Counter Strike or something like that. And I thought that was a really nice change. And then I was doing that for a little bit, and I was gonna like look into competing in PUBG. And then that's when ESL had basically said we're following E6, whatever about unbanning them because the bans happened prior to February 2015, and they were saying like anything after this date will be this punishment. Before that date, we're kind of saying since there was no precedent, we're gonna let these people play. So ESL and then DreamHack followed shortly after. I'm like, hey, there's a way for me to compete again, and I never felt like I fully scratched that itch. So I'm just like, you know what, I'm gonna do it because I think I'm still capable. I still have that itch, and it's the game that I started in, and it's the game that got me into this in the first place. So I'm gonna do it.
So where does it, how do you feel about where things are now? Because obviously things have changed quite a lot. You've managed to actually play in a bunch of teams with a bunch of different players, and it seems like you are still kind of grinding. So how do you look at things where they are now?
The scene is definitely very different. So when I started playing, and even up until like when I was on Nabbit Power, what would happen is that you would be playing with other people that really wanted to do everything. They were not making salary. So if you're putting that time in, you're not messing about. You're there. You're fully committed. But beyond that, it's like if you are a problem in a team, and the rest of the players in the team realize that, there's no like, oh, we have to do this or that to like mitigate it. We have to speak to management. We have to do this and that. It's like you're gone. That's it. Like problems are just weeded out and removed, and you're able to create teams. And there's a lot of backstabbing that happened because of that. But at the same time, like I feel like a lot of red tape now, where you can't just do things. You have to kind of go through these weird processes, and sometimes there's people that don't really understand the scene, but you still have to like try to explain it to them. They don't understand like dynamics between certain players, or they don't understand like results. Like how come you beat this team, but then you couldn't beat that team? And then it's just like, well, because of here's all the circumstances, and you're trying to explain this to people that aren't really, they don't have their pulse on esports. So there is a lot of difference there. I think having a salary is very nice in terms of I don't have to worry about after practice streaming to make sure that I can make ends meet and make sure that I can actually compete. I don't have to worry about that. I don't have to worry about how I'm going to pay rent or bills or whatever. I have that stability financially that I can just commit to this stuff. but also kind of having that ban from, I think it's right now just majors, potentially also ECS or whatever ECS is. I don't even know. Basically, maybe you have more insight about that. So with that kind of hanging overhead, a lot of orgs are just like, you know what? Maybe we want to look at other people that haven't accomplished shit in the last 5 years instead of you, because they are at least allowed to sign up to compete at the minor, but you're not. So it makes it more difficult to kind of create teams with the pieces that I would want to. Like ideally, you would think like, okay, what types of who would you want to play with? Oh, I really want to play with this guy, and this guy really wants to play with me, but he's getting this offer from this other team, and this organization is just like, no, we can't do anything. So, it wasn't like the greatest of experiences, because there was a lot of talking, a lot of like back and forth, a lot of like disappointment, because I'm just like the people that I was like initially talking to were just like, oh, I got this offer, see ya. And it's just like, oh, okay, cool, I'll just try to meet other people, I guess. So that experience was kind of not the super greatest, because it just feels like a lot of opportunity is still gone, and it's just, I feel like there's so many other opportunities in the scene, especially currently, and then in the future with leagues rumored to be franchised and everything, where there's probably not those restrictions on me. It feels like I don't know what the hell's going on, and I don't fully control what's going to end up happening with me.
It is interesting. I think you raise a good point about the way leagues and things will be changing in the future. It does seem like there is, especially considering that a good in-game leader, an IGL that has experience, is really like gold dust in the scene. That is of course always going to be the shortage, just because of the nature of the kind of person that it necessitates. It's a very specific thing, and having a young person be a good IGL, it just doesn't quite seem to work that way. And I think what's really interesting too is that because we have this situation where coaches can't be, callers, they can't be the in-game leader effectively. You do have to have somebody that's a seasoned player and has experience, and that's like a really interesting, issue in the scene in that sense. And I feel like that is hugely, valuable. In you being who you are and having all of that experience and value as an IGL, I feel like that's so hugely valuable. So that seems to be like, in some respects, surely like the light at the end of the tunnel that you will still be in demand. I mean, what about you actually working with teams? Is that something that does Valve like not want you to work with a team that's competing in a major, even if you're not necessarily directly even a coach?
No, I reached out to Valve about that, because a team had actually asked me about the situation and asked if I'd be like interested in being a coach, for example. And I reached out to Valve and asked them like what their clarification on all of that was, and they said they don't care as long as I'm not playing. As far as restrictions go, Valve just doesn't want me playing in the tournament, but I could be a coach. I don't know if I'm allowed to be a coach, but like I can't be at the event or something. I'm not sure about that specifics, but they're not going to disqualify a team because I'm their coach, for example.
Have you had many offers to coach teams?
I've had a few, yeah, from like pretty big orgs, but it's not something that I was really super considering. It might be something I consider down the line, but for the moment, it's not something I want to consider, because I think I'm still capable as a player. Even though I'm 30, I think that I'm not like statistically holding my team back. I'm not like completely getting demolished every time I enter a server. I think I hold my own pretty well, and I think that even some games I'm able to do more, like way more than that.
And one thing that I've learned from, even though I've not even been an active, like super active player, but just someone that's kind of fantasized with the idea of being able to jump back into it and just being ready for that moment that's never going to come. I feel like I've learned a lot over the years in terms of how to keep myself really sharp in way more efficient ways, like much less time invested, especially because once you, like someone like yourself as well, I think there are some parallels between us in terms of like how analytical and introspective you are in terms of, yourself as a player. I think you look at it also from a holistic perspective. You're not just extremely focused on one particular aspect. Like, I feel like that's the kind of person you are. So it would follow, for me, from what I know about myself, that you would have had insights like every year a lot of insights as to how to improve yourself, even mechanically, even with the mouse control, adding consistency and so on and so forth. So is there anything on that line that you can speak to as you've grown older? Has it actually made you stronger?
I'd say like there's definitely I've gone through kind of peaks in terms of performance. I'd say in 2012 I peaked, in 2015 I peaked, and I'm thinking I'm going to be peaking again soon. I think there was a period of time when I was on Torque as well that my performance was peaking, and I think that it just happens kind of like in waves. I think one way that I described it in the past was I'd kind of get these epiphanies about Counter Strike. I'd be kind of going through the motions a lot, and then one day I go to sleep, I wake up and like, holy shit, like how come I never considered it this way? Or just with regards to anything with mechanics or meta strategy tactics, anything like that, it's kind of like they come in epiphanies. And with regards to just like the holistic approach and stuff, yeah, I definitely think like a balanced lifestyle, like making sure you see sunlight, making sure you're eating healthy and not overeating, and you're getting the proper nutrients, and you're getting enough sleep, and you're living an active lifestyle. I think all of these contribute to and having being in a good mood. I think all of these contribute into how you're going to perform well. And I definitely do think that I've kind of figured it out with regards to. I don't want to say I figured it out, but I definitely see people that have the most disgustingly good aim that sit in death matches for hours per day in a death match, and their aim is so just grossly insane. Like they'll flick one tap you all the time, but then they sit in a match server and they don't know how to handle like the most basic situations. They don't know how to communicate. They don't know how to offer support for their teammates and like double peak or support flashes. They forget all the smokes and flash lineups that you need to know so that you can like help get your teammates into sites. Just all these situations, and then also like you can see them like flick one tap like and kill like 60 bots per minute or something, and then aim bots or something, but then they get into a match and they're just like flying out and then they crouch spray. It's like, what is happening? Like all these hours you're just sinking into this death match, and not one of those hours is actually helping you when it comes to match time because your aim's already so just disgustingly sick. Why are you not going into a server and just like practicing your lineups for smokes and flashes? Why are you not going and practicing like your movement or your jiggle peaks? Or why are you not like getting more reps in where you're super try hard, and even in a matchmaking game or a pug where you're actually just practicing communication? These are all things that will contribute to you being a better player, but people are so focused on just mechanics and then stats. But the stats, it's like there's so many stats in the game that you can look at that are stats are so comprehensive if you look at like all of them with a broad scope. But people just look at kills and deaths and then maybe like damage per round or something like that. And there's just so much that goes into this game, and people are just focused on such a tiny little aspect of it, and it just boggles my mind, to be honest.
It's funny because just yesterday I released I don't know, like a 7-minute answer to like somebody who asked me on stream this question, like why is it that my DM doesn't translate to competitive, was like the question. And I was just talking about all the things you were just mentioning there. It's really interesting because the deathmatch thing is like kind of like a really huge false positive for most people, because most people seem to have really faulty success metrics in terms of how they view the game, and they look at it as kills. And it's really interesting, in a sense, because deathmatch makes you feel like a god. It's actually, I think, like one of the best things about it is that it supports you kind of emotionally, makes you like really confident and feel good. But ultimately, you're in a lot of really ridiculous situations, like where and the whole point of playing competitive is picking all the plus EV spots, making every frag as easy as possible. You're not supposed to hit really fancy shots. It's not. It's not about that. Yeah. So it's like don't have to go. I don't have to kind of preach to the choir there. I think you covered it well enough. But it is interesting, and I think it just goes down to the idea that again, people don't really. The game is complicated, and as you say, it's difficult, I think, for the average person who's never really like looked at a game and learned how to analyze things, or ever really even necessarily analyzed anything in depth, because I know that I sure as shit didn't until even the later phases of my career as a player in Quake. Like the first like 4 or 5 years when I was like playing at a high level, I was just dumb as a brick in terms of like how I was playing. And it wasn't until I kept hitting those walls that it eventually necessitated that I had to like become an analyst effectively and to really understand how to become better. It's just such an easy focus, I think. And also, I think the other issue, I talked to Valens about this, is that we have this like really weird system of like discovering players and how we kind of talk about that is that like it's pretty much all from, well, not all of it, but a lot of it is from pickups and from FPL and from these kind of these teams that just assemble with a bunch of nutty fraggers and then disassemble again, and there's streamers and stuff. Like there's no like traditional sport where that process exists.
Yeah. So just to tag on to that, you're absolutely right. Like people just look at people and they're like, "Oh, this guy's got sick mechanics. Like he's got great potential to be a good player." It's like, well, what besides his like ability to move his mouse and click on a head has given you that, I guess, impression that they have potential to be a star player, to be a top 20 player? Like, do you know anything about their work ethic? Do they know how to put the time in? Do they know what it means to like actually put the time in to be a good, well-rounded player? Does putting time into them just mean sitting in a DM for 2 hours and getting that, perfect aim or those perfect clicks? Because working hard encompasses like being able to go and review the game and take the notes and be able to offer and receive criticism, and to not like mentally shut down if someone tells you like there's a better way to do something or a more optimized way, or to challenge your viewpoint. It's really crazy to me that people will always talk about potential. I think a lot of gamers these days, and this is something that I've been like noticing more and more recently, is that you kind of like get to being like an MDL level player when you're like 16 years old. You're still in high school. Maybe you're 17 or 18, but a lot of these players today, they haven't really worked a full-time job. They haven't gone to university. They don't know what it's like to actually like work hard or have someone kind of tough breathe down their necks type of thing. Like, I don't know. I grew up doing sports my whole life. I've worked full-time jobs, part-time jobs. I know what it's like to have like an actual person yell at you for doing something wrong or make a mistake. And it feels like when you speak to certain players, you can just gauge the fact that they have no life experience, and that plays a huge role in a person's maturity level or ability to develop as a player. I think there's so many players that in 2 to 3 years' time they could be actually like insane players. They're just not old enough yet to actually be able to internalize everything they learn and process the information and understand why it's important to do these other things, because their life outlook is so short term, it's not long term, and they don't understand like a lot of these intricacies and nuances of being a professional player and competing at the highest level. And it's not something that you could teach. Like, that comes from experience, that comes from living, that comes from just having experiences happen and accumulate.
It's a really interesting one because we talk a lot about ego, and that's something that like I know a bunch of players that are really good and they don't touch pugs because it's just such a toxic environment because people are throwing their egos around left and right. And it's really interesting too because it seems to be the case to me that, I mean, I think that this parallels with a lot of other areas of life as well, where someone holds an idea and kind of lives by that kind of ideology or whatever it might be, even if it's, and it may be an idea that's not very well fleshed out, but they just identify with it and they don't go any deeper, and you attack that idea, or not even attack it necessarily, but suggest that maybe there's a different way to do things. People get very defensive, especially when the whole reality is constructed around something like this. And I think it's similarly it can be the case in CS when you have a player whereby everybody's kind of religion is the, as you said before, like the stats of the kills, the deaths, the ADR, and your face it rank or elo, whatever it might be. And when people kind of use that to kind of, or if you let's say you suggest to someone that they're doing something wrong, they may become incredibly defensive just simply because they don't have anything else. If you take away that one thing from them, they don't have anything else because they don't have this well versed idea about all the different kind of concepts in the game and how to use them and how they've thought about them and how that they're more than just this one thing. And I think that's a huge issue is that there's not enough kind of popularity around being kind of more educated, I guess,
Yeah.
in Counter-Strike, in the Counter-Strike world, which is, I think you were doing really good work with that because, you produce a lot of really good content, especially around kind of the basics, kind of the fundamentals and giving the fundamentals like language. So, you can name it. And I think that's really powerful. A lot of the time people use ambiguous terms and it's really hard to keep track of stuff. But I think you were pretty precise with how you talked about the game. And I've noticed, that you haven't really been producing as much content as you used to. So is there any reason behind that?
I don't like the quality of a lot of the content I do, and also I was like, also even recently considering like deleting a lot of my older content because it's very dated, or my viewpoints on things have changed, or the meta has changed. Like even something like I haven't watched my demo review with Stewie2K, but like he asked me to do a demo review of him before, like when he was still like playing with Ocean, for example, like years ago, like like before he even joined Cloud9, before he played his first LAN event. And I feel like I had a lot of things to say that either like in today's meta wouldn't work or wouldn't be good, or maybe he did things right and I said like no, this wasn't right. I'm thinking of like actually going back and rewatching it and just like looking at how much my opinions changed or my perspectives changed or how much the scenes changed, how much the meta's changed, and just being like, you know what, this is old and outdated and just like it needs to go and it needs to be redone. But a lot of other stuff is just like if I go to create a new content piece, whether it be something with regards to theory or something with tactics or strats, I don't want it to be a low quality thing. I don't want to put out content that I'm not happy with. And I feel like I've put out way too many of those pieces just because I had an obligation to a sponsor to meet a deadline or to meet a quota of how many videos I do. And I don't want to do these like kind of half-ass things just so that I can get it out. So in those terms, I feel like I'm a perfectionist, and that's a large reason why I haven't done it, because it's going to take a lot of time investment to actually put out something that I'm happy with. And yeah, I just don't know if I will be happy with it.
Maybe you'll find the right person to help you at some point because I know, especially as well, like if you're very busy, I think it's one of the lessons I learned in the last like year or so in particular is that you can't do everything yourself. um
Yeah.
and I kind of lean towards that. I don't know, I feel like involving other people makes things complicated, but I need to get over that. That's the thing I've been dealing with.
It depends on like the does it generate income. Like if it's not generating income and then I'm also hiring someone to like put it together, then I'm basically losing money to put out content pieces, and that doesn't really make any sense at all. If it's something that like, oh, I'm getting this much money from the content pieces I put out, and I can basically break even for it, maybe it's something I consider, because like in that case it's not like I'm losing money, it's just a time investment. It just comes down to if it's something I want to do or not. And then if it's something that does generate money, and like and I make a profit and I can like outsource the work as well to someone to put stuff together, then it's like, okay, you know what, like I can put something out, someone's going to put it together, I have to put this much work in, but then like I can see a reward from like a financial, you know, benefit from it, then it's something that I could really look into doing seriously. But other reasons why I don't do that fully is because I can't separate what is like new stuff that I want to do with my team that isn't stuff that's like already pretty mainstream or common throughout the pro scene. And it's hard for me to know, like, do I want to share this or do I want to share something that's a little bit more old, like an old strat that I used to do, as opposed to this new thing I found. Like if I'm even when it comes to utility, like I one of the popular videos that I did more recently was the useful utility on Inferno, and I can do that across other maps, but I need to decide, like, do I want to show like all of my like all the best smokes I know on this map, or do I want to show like really useful ones that are pretty easy lineups to learn and they're pretty useful, but that are like things that pros are already doing? And then I don't want like someone else to come out with a video that's like well, I'm going to share like all the new stuff that Steele and his team's doing in his matches. It's like, why didn't I just put that out? Or, you know, but like one of the things that good like top teams are going to do, or top players, is they're not going to share all their secrets. Definitely not. Like if they wanted to get to the top and stay at the top, they're not sharing their new secrets. They're sharing like the secrets they did yesterday because they have a new secret. They have a better way of doing it. They have a better method. They have a better everything. It's like, oh, I used to do this. I have a better way to do it. So now I'll share this old way with you because you're going to stay one step behind me now every time because you're waiting for me to put out the next thing.
No, that makes sense. I always have wondered with Sean because he, wasn't when he was sort of playing actively with the team. It seemed like he was putting out a lot of content suddenly with the freedom to do that because he wasn't kind of actively playing with any teams, and it kind of I did wonder like how much did Sean's videos actually impact the pro scene to some extent. It's, I suppose hard to measure, but I definitely see your quandary there. Speaking of all this content and educational stuff you've been putting out, and how we were kind of also discussing perhaps the difficulties that there are in being a young player and an analyst, or just somebody that kind of is able to understand the game more comprehensively. What would you say would be the starting point for someone listening who is a player that wants to be really good, has those good mechanics like we talked about, but they need to learn these fundamentals? Like, what is the best way for them to sink their teeth into it?
I think a lot of it is just critical thinking skills. I think people need to really challenge what they hear and think about it. So even if they see a video of mine and I say this is good for this reason, like they shouldn't just take it as it is at face value. They should challenge my viewpoint. Be like, okay, I'm gonna think about it this way. Yeah, that makes sense. But what about this situation or that situation? Just really get into thinking about the game and doing a lot of thought experiments, because there's a lot of things I've put out in content pieces that are wrong. There's a lot of things that I'll, in game review with my team, I will say things and it's not the best or most optimized view of how the situation could have been played out. So I think critical thinking skills is something that's definitely one of the biggest things that people need to really develop. And another thing that I learned while working in IT is just the way that you kind of go and break down problems and kind of troubleshoot and look to fix things, whether it be issues within the team, issues outside of the team, issues in the game, issues with your play style. Just being able to kind of troubleshoot and work your way through those situations is also really important. And I feel like those are skills that need to be developed. And the only way that you develop them is through practice.
Are these things that you've had to go across or go over with on your teammates, in almost like a mentorship role, because again of your experience, and I'd imagine you've played with a lot of people that, again, like we've been talking about, don't necessarily have the most developed kind of awareness for their own game to help themselves improve at the correct rate.
I'm not very good at that mentorship stuff. I'm not gonna lie. When it comes to that, I feel like I'm getting better just because of my experiences with Ghost, with previous teams, moving into Chaos. I feel like I'm approaching the situation a lot better now than I was, especially on Ghost, because I feel like people look to in-game leaders to be more than just shot callers and people that run practice. They look to them to be like
Captain.
the mentor stuff, like being like actual all around leaders, and that's something that I haven't really had a lot of practice with, because when we were coming up in the scene 2008 to 2014 15 whatever, when I'm playing Counter-Strike, all the people that I'm playing with are challenging me constantly, and it's something that kind of keeps me, continually like having to make sure that everything I'm saying is right, and they're challenging my views and everything, and that's good. It helps me grow as a player. And now when I'm just like in this mentorship thing, and people are just always looking up to me, and I'm not getting any like resistance, anyone to say like, is this really the right way to do it? I feel like it's different this way, and they're just like always quiet. It's just I'm not gonna learn or grow or anything like that as well. But I don't know. It's just like a different dynamic, I guess. It's not like a good or bad thing. It's just I'm not used to it. It's not something I've learned. I haven't learned the skills of how to be a good mentor or leader in that regard.
Which players of the ones you've worked with do you feel like you've had the most impact on, and why would that be?
Oof. I'm not sure. Like I feel like I didn't really do what I wanted to do with pretty much like since I got unbanned. I feel like I haven't done what I've set out to do yet. I feel like it's really hard. I feel like I did a lot of good things with Kusta, and I'm hoping that like he's able to do whatever we learned on Ghost together. I hope he's able to kind of make that better on his current team with Gen G. But from results, I can't tell anything from results. I haven't watched the game, so I don't know if that's actually come through. I feel like I didn't really have that connection with anyone else on Ghost or Torque. I feel like those relationships never really flourished the same way that relationships with other players and other teams in my past have flourished. Like I never got to be like really super close friends with them. We never really like did anything like, oh, it's not team practice time, but we're just gonna talk about random shit, life shit. Like I feel like Kusa I did that with to a certain extent, but with other people I never really did that on Ghost, which is something I'm trying to do a little bit more on Chaos, and it helps that we're going to be living together as well. So it's very difficult, just because. And then another thing is like I'm 30, and a lot of the people I'm playing with were either 22 years old or younger. Like Neptune, for example, 16 years old. There's so much different with everything in our lives. Not just like I'm from Canada, he's from the States, and like which part of Canada, which part of the States, and he grew up in the 2000s. I grew up in the 90s, basically, and it's just so weird to be able to connect with someone like that if you've never kind of. I never had that type of mentorship or anything growing up, so it's hard to like draw on like past experiences when it comes to that. I didn't have a mentor or leader. I kind of like just had to do shit on my own and then go. And when I started playing CounterStrike, I was with other people that were my age, were like minded, and had kind of similar upbringings or similar situations, and we were all able to like hang out and talk about things that were relevant to each other. But the experiences in life that I had versus what Neptune have were very very different. So it was very hard for me to connect with him in that way. And I think he's like a super sick player. I think he's like one of those players that in like 2 or 3 years time will be really fucking sick. But that there's just a lot that you need to kind of develop as a person. Like that's how maturity works. I think in a lot of rights he's very mature, but there's things that you just need life experience for, and you just need to go through the motions of that. And that's why I found it difficult for me to connect with people.
So, of course, speaking to what you just said, it's different for everybody. You have to take on your own kind of challenges as they come to you, and you can't really force the change that's necessary for that evolution of somebody. But I think we often hear this kind of idea of improving as a person, and I think it comes across fairly ambiguously because it's such a huge scope to that phrase. But there's something that we hear about Smooya quite a lot. Obviously, as someone that was kind of young and hot-headed, but extremely mechanically gifted, and had to go through his time with Big, and we constantly hear him kind of talking about that. Obviously, in a recent interview, but previously it had come up as well, and it did appear that is a player that needed additional life experience, that additional maturity. So, do you think is it just like communication, discipline, responsibility? Are we talking, that kind of critical thinking? Is it anything more than those things I just mentioned? I'm just trying to get rid of some of the ambiguity of improving as a person because I hear it quite a lot, and I think it'd be nice to kind of offer that perspective with a bit more depth.
Are we talking about Smear in general, or generalize like people in general about?
A little bit of both here, just to kind of decodify that phrase, as well as using Smoothie perhaps even to put him in the scopes for this one just as well because he's
Yeah.
joining into chaos now and playing with you guys.
I think for everyone it's going to be different. Like they're going to have different experiences growing up. They're going to come from different situations. Some people are from a family that's upper middle class, and they're just playing games and they're kind of allowed to do whatever they want. Their parents never say no to them. They're never challenged. Like they get away with everything, and they come to playing CounterStrike, and when someone tells them like, "What are you doing?" Like challenging what they're doing, telling them like you're late for practice or something like that, and they're just like, well, my mom never says I'm late. They've never been punished. Like they're gonna have a very different demeanor as someone who kind of grows up in a lower class family that in order to get a computer to play these games, like they have to like take on part-time jobs, or they have to save up for years to be able to order each computer part, and every time that they load up CS to play, like they're playing because they want to have and create a good situation for their family and for themselves when they're older. Like you're going to get different people with different background, different experiences that come with their own sets of things that they'll be stronger and weaker at. And I think that a lot of kids these days that are coming through like the NBLC and that are like between 16 and 18 or 19 years old, I feel like I might be completely wrong with this. It's not like I've done empirical scientific research to figure out if this is right or not, but just from anecdotal experience, they're from middle class families where they're able to just afford to sit on the computer for 8 to 12 hours a day and just grind CS. And I think for a lot of those people that kind of get to the ranks of like FPLC, and then they get to FPL or rank G to rank S, and they get into MDL and are on the MDL team and they have 6 stats, I feel like they grow these egos that they think that since they made it there on their own in X amount of time, that they don't need help from other people because they've already come this far. Why would they need to listen to someone else? Because they're just as good or better or going to be better in a year if they just keep doing what they're doing. And I feel like a lot of players kind of get stuck in that mindset, and they'll get to a certain level and then they'll just like sit there for 2 or 3 years and sit there scratching their heads wondering why the fuck did I never make it? And I think then you have people on the other side of it that kind of do make it, and then they think they're really good, and then I guess in Smooth's situation, he decided to bench himself from big because I don't know specifically what the reasons were, but I think he was thinking he was going to get loads of offers coming in right away, and because that didn't happen, it kind of humbled him to like reassess things. And I feel like not a lot of people get those opportunities to kind of reassess where they are and be able to feel humbled in that regard. I feel like a lot of people just hang on to their egos about, well, I've already made it this far. I'm not. Why are people not interested in me? Oh, it must be because of politics. It must be because of this. It must be because of that. Like people just make excuses about why they're not getting the opportunities or why they're not successful or why people aren't interested in them, and people aren't looking into themselves and seeing like what is it that I can look to fixing, or what is it about me. And part of that is because when people try to like offer feedback or criticism, they just like block it out entirely. I know like the biggest criticisms for me as a player is like it's the how I speak to people. It's with regards to how I handle my emotions in game. It's about how I connect with people. Those have been like how my voice seems stressed when we're in games. Like those are the biggest criticisms about me, and it's a fairly consistent trend. And it's something that I am able to be like, okay, like this is like what everyone that I've played with is saying. It's something that I work on, and it's something that if people listen to like the team speak of us playing matches versus watching one of my rage compilations from 5 years ago, people would be like, wait, what? I thought Steel was toxic. And I think that other players don't really get to deep down dive down this path of really understanding what it is that's preventing them from getting to this next level because they don't want to hear it from other people. and that's just their ego talking. And I feel like a lot of people need to kind of let people give constructive feedback and criticism and feel humbled, and not just be like, I'm not going to listen to you.
I've got to say, it's one of the most beautiful things for me with competitive anything, but esports specifically in my life as a lens for self improvement has just been a phenomenally powerful force. As you say, like if you are honest with what the game is telling you, and if you have that honesty, and then you can be humbled by the answers that you get from that honesty, it's going to take you really far. So I like that. I like how you touched on kind of that idea of extreme ownership as well, as opposed to all of the excuses and kind of hiding away from the reality of it all. But speaking about Smuya, he's obviously coming into your lineup, and you've worked with a lot of AWPers, and how do you build a team around an AWPer that is as good as someone like Smuya?
I think right now we just haven't had the opportunity to really dig down and do any sort of server work or anything. The day that he arrived, or like the night before, sorry, he arrived at night on one day, and then the next day we had an open qualifier, and then the next day we had the BO3 to qualify for the closed qualifier, and then the next day we had the closed qualifier. So we haven't really had a chance to actually, one, do any scrim reps, two, do much like server work, theory work, anything like that. So one of the things that was an issue in the match against United in the close qualifier was that he had a very different system and different play style, and different just everything from what kind of like I'm trying to do and build with everyone else. That there was a lot of like confusion and a lot of like different ideas happening, and we weren't on the same page. So I think one of the things that we need to kind of do is find a way to incorporate his strengths and ideas and assimilate that into what we have over time when we grant ourselves the time to do it. And I think it's a process that isn't going to happen the first day or the first week, and probably not even the first month, but it's something where we have a lot of systems in place, and he has a lot of knowledge and style and approach that he learned from his previous teams, and especially in big, that we're going to need to find a balance of how we're going to fit his opping style into my calling style, and how everyone else, like everyone needs to be on the same page, so everyone needs to listen to the main voice of the team, which is me. So if I'm saying something and he's saying something else, then we have a problem. So we need to make sure that we're on the same wavelength. And to get on the same wavelength after he's been playing with different colors, different styles, different systems, when he's a European style, I'm North American style. I'm not even like a traditional North American style. Like I do things my own way. So it's just a process that's going to take time.
So how would you describe the North American style, and then how would you describe how yours differs?
I don't know what the specific, like, I don't think there is one North American style. I think one of the things I see a lot of is, so EG style, I would say, is more like a loose structured thing where everyone's kind of trying to do things on their own, and they have like their wins come from individually playing really good performances and making huge plays kind of on their own. And when it comes to like actual setup stuff, I feel like it's very loose, and there's a lot of like, I'm gonna do this, if this happens I'm gonna do this, or I'm doing this, can you tell me, sorry, can you do this for me? And I don't think that's, I think my style is kind of similar to that. I can't talk about how much structure, I haven't spoken to Stanislaw. I don't know how he thinks. I don't know how the team operates. This is just from outside perspective looking in.
Sure.
Liquid, they are very, very skilled individual players. They do a lot of team fights together, a lot of gamble stacks, a lot of gamble rotations, a lot of reads. And I feel like the reason why they lose is because they're not individually like all hitting shots, or they're gambling the wrong sites, they're leaving holes and everything. But those teams are like anomalies in the scene. I feel like when you come down to it, there's a lot of people that, like, especially in scrims, holy shit, people are insane in scrims. You'll play scrims and people will just be wide swinging, one tapping, recoil, like flick shot, like headshot, just insane scenes, to be honest. But then you play them in matches and they sit around for like a minute and they don't, like, they're afraid to make a play for the first minute. And then it's like there's a minute left on the clock and they have zero map control and they don't know what to do. And I feel like a lot of what other teams have right now is that besides EG and Liquid, a lot of teams rely on having an in-game leader create setups and strats for every player to know their role and know what to do on those roles, or like do on those rounds. And it doesn't really allow people to kind of individually understand situations, create their own plans, adapt on their own, say like, oh, this is what's happening here. Let's do this to adjust to it. And I feel like the way that I'm trying to run the team is to allow everyone to get to the level of understanding that they're able to think for themselves, know when to rotate, where to rotate to, when to push for map control, when to sit tight and not do anything, when to hold setups, how to adjust. I think if everyone's able to get to a level individually to know all those things, then it removes a lot of the onus from me to kind of tell everyone what to do. And then because of that, it's going to free me up to be able to focus on playing my game as opposed to microing or looking at radar and being unfocused in the game, which is going to ultimately lead to me having a worse performance. And if I have a worse performance and I'm playing an important spot on CT side or T side, then it's going to have a big impact on the team. And I feel like that's what happens with a lot of, especially younger teams, is that their in-game leaders are just like not performing well because they're sitting there like calling the strats and micromanaging absolutely everyone to make sure that they're doing everything on the right timings because they don't trust the players to make their own decisions. So I'd rather just help all the players individually be able to make the right decisions by preparing them for it, and then when we go and play, I don't have to think for them as much.
I think you touched on a lot of really interesting points there. I think one of the first things is how we already talked about kind of like that deathmatch thing, where it's like, you know, people expect deathmatch to translate to competitive, and that's two completely different things. And it almost seems to be the case that, you know, what you were describing as to, you know, how good people are in scrims is almost like a more kind of advanced version of the deathmatch syndrome, whereby, you know, when you're deathmatching, you know, there's no stakes. You know, you can do whatever the hell you want,
Yeah.
and so there's no fear. And similarly, there's no pressure in scrims. But also in scrims, a lot of these players, as you were describing, are really young, and they're able to put in such a ridiculous amount of hours into the game that they get to kind of just adapt to whatever the meta is now. The timings, they get an inherent sense for the, you know, that, well, the kind of inner clock, as it were, of CSGO's meta as it is right now. And so they don't even have to think to do a lot of the plays they're doing because they just over the grind, they just kind of get good enough through the grind. But what the grind doesn't give them, if it's not directed correctly, is the ability to think. And so if you don't have the ability to think, then you're going to freeze up in a match because you don't even know why you're doing the things that you're doing and why they're successful in a scrim or why they're not successful in a scrim. So you're going to freeze up because all you're going to feel now is the pressure as to, oh shit, if it goes wrong, then obviously we're gonna be in a bad situation, and you don't have the ability to kind of engineer a good outcome from an environment that's changing all the time. Like CS has so many variables. It's like when I see people talk about Astralis sometimes, and you know why Astralis is so good, people might focus on the strats or the tactics that they run, but the layer beneath that is really why they're so good. And it goes back to what you said, like that entire team, every single player is on the same page. There's so many different variables, different things that could happen in CS. But as soon as the situation changes, doesn't matter how minute it is, every single one of those guys knows exactly what their adjustment is. Like everyone thinks exactly the same way. It's because they all have this really deep fundamental understanding of the game, and they're all on the same wavelength as you described. And that's pretty difficult to get to that point. I don't know how you how you get there, but it's
Astralis, they were all on the same wavelength, but they don't have like these rigid set routines or reactions that everyone has to have. Like when this happens, this is what you do. It's like when this happens, I understand that this is what's happening in the game, and I understand that these are my options, And with how the rest of my team's set up, and given like the previous information that we have in this previous round, or the previous rounds, or the previous match, or from the game review that we like, the preparation for this team, the way that we know that they play their style as opposed to any other team style, I'm going to make this decision for this reaction. And they can do that without Glaive having to say, you need to do reaction XYZ this time. So yeah.
Kind of goes beyond like the idea of, because every like one of the most important things to establish as any team is like protocols,
Yeah.
which is kind of like that's you're talking about Astralis, they go beyond needing protocols because they don't need it. Everyone knows what to do.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter the situation, so no protocols required. That's really the optimal scenario to be in.
So I think people get hung up on protocols for different reasons. I think like protocols are good. Being able to be like, okay, I'm CT side of train, and I see. First of all, you need to have an aid protocol for mid. You need to be able to just stop a rush. You need to stop someone from going out and getting a free kill. You need to stop someone sneaking out to like sandwich an ult. You need to have those protocols. And if nades come over, you need to have protocols on like, okay, if they smoke sandwich an E-box and they flash over, we need a protocol to go and prevent that. But you don't say like, okay, this is the protocol. If they do this, you do this exact set thing. No, the protocol is we need to stop rush, and then if rush is stopped, we need to go and clip stuff out if they can be there, and if they're not there, then we have to take control. And you kind of have that checklist of stuff, but it's not so rigid that you're told what to do. You just need to know this needs to get done somehow. And I think a lot of newer teams are stuck in the phase of I need to do it this way every time, and then that's what leads them to be easier to read and not really think for themselves, and they're not doing themselves a service. Like when you play a practice scrim and you're playing with the ultimate goal of winning the game, then you're not really focusing on what you're not good at. And then what's going to happen is you're going to play a match against a team that gives a different style, or they have a different approach, or maybe what you're doing isn't working against them for whatever reason. You're not going to have anything else to fall back on because you're just playing all your practice games to win. And maybe it's working against the teams that you're playing against in those practice games. But then what if it doesn't work against the team that you're playing in a match? That means that, oh, I'm winning doing this style. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop doing this because I already know it works. I already know what it's strong against. I already have a good feeling of everything that goes into the style. What I'm going to do is I'm going to play something that I'm not comfortable with. We might lose the scrim. We might lose scrims for the next week or two. But at the end of all of this, I'm going to become a better player. I'm going to be more well-rounded. I'm going to have more things to fall back on. If I'm playing my main style against a team that's not working, I have something else I have in my back pocket. Maybe it's not the thing I'm strongest at, but it's going to be good enough that instead of getting 16-0'd by this team, I have a chance of winning 16-14.
It's such a. I mean, Counter-Strike's amazing. Like how in depth it is. That it can capture your minds and the minds of all of us to such an extent, and the fact that you can have so many different teams at the very top level playing different styles of Counter-Strike, struggling for consistency, but the fact that, let's say, Astralis have found a formula and a way of doing things that goes beyond something that's already pretty difficult to accomplish, like almost like they can just also read each other's minds. And it's a good explanation that you just gave, with protocols, and I'm glad like you kind of cleared that up a little bit, because people do, as you say, talk about them quite a lot, but we don't often really get more of an insight into them than just kind of the surface level stuff. And it kind of moving the discussion almost a little bit, because I want to go over some of the community questions, because we do have quite a few for you. So Alex asks, what are your thoughts on Device versus Zyri versus Simple versus Elige for number one in 2019?
Oh, I don't really have an opinion on that. I feel like Alping is easier, so Elige is gonna have a tall order to tackle as a pure rifler. I think Device is definitely on a better team, and that's gonna definitely assist things in terms of individual skill. But I guess when it comes down to it, there's like, who is the best player in terms of raw skill? I'd probably see Zywoo and Simple up at the top just because of their, I don't know, individual ability to perform well even if their team's not performing well, if that makes sense. But I
Yeah,
don't know
no,
how else
absolutely.
to answer that question because I don't know. They're all really good and really valuable players in their own way.
Yeah, it's in a team game. It's still so difficult, doesn't it, to pin down an answer to a question like that. That
Yeah.
it's just very difficult. I think it's really interesting that list of 4 players because to me, Device and Elige are very different than Zyro and Simple for the fact that like from the way I look at a player, I usually kind of have I think I have like 3 categories normally. One is kind of like as you said, like the raw talent. Then you have the kind of the mental side of the game, which can incorporate a lot of different aspects. And then also lastly is going to be kind of the work ethic, because usually what you find is you can find really talented players that will be fairly weak on the work ethic or not quite as regimented. And then you can find the players that have incredible work ethic and probably are a little bit better in the
Yeah.
mental area just because they have to work harder. That kind of like necessitates more work ethic because they need to keep up with the really talented guys. So that's normally the kind of the balance that I think is out there. And then you have those like the freak of nature people where like they're just actually just freakishly talented and have a freakish work ethic on top of it and have an incredible kind of way of looking at themselves and managing themselves as
Yeah.
human beings. Like those are quite rare. I don't
They're-
even think that we
yeah.
have one of those to the truest extent.
I was just gonna say, like, I think Device plays like a textbook almost style of CS, which is pretty good, but it's not like how do you measure skill at that point? Like, it depends on what the measurement of skill is in order to answer that question.
Yeah, it's very difficult. Yeah, especially if we look at the previous discussion where you were just talking about like chemistry and personality in a team, for example, and how critical that is. And if obviously it seems to be the case that whether it's because they're all Danish or whether it's because they've all shared so many experiences together or whether it's because for whatever reason they just actually genuinely do just get along extremely well as human beings, and that's just that's really just so much luck of the draw going on there, and at the same time have all kind of their own styles of the game that kind of fits together well, and they all found each other at the right time. It's like there's so many kind of like factors going into why each of those players gets to succeed. But what about the kind of the opposite of that, the inverse? What about all the players that are like could have been maybe on this top 20 list, but they didn't get the right environment? Maybe, it's a player that's from a scene that doesn't have easy access to experienced players or pools of talent to play against or people to mentor them, maybe someone from the Oceanic region or like whatever it is. Like it's there's so many players that I feel like if they could have had the right mentorship, they would have been extremely good. But because they didn't, it like delays them coming out as great players for like another 2 years or something. So it's really difficult,
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah, it is.
Well, all right. Right. So we have another question here. It is this is from Jonah on Twitter. What does Ben Leet do within the team? How will Whippy be used now that Smia has taken the orb?
So Whippy would be moving to like a more lurky style with a rifle, and he would second up on CT side as well. And that's something that he was like already doing before joining this team. So when he was before he played with us, like he had never been a primary opper, and it's something that he had to learn from scratch. So like day one from playing with us, he had to learn every primary op position on every map. So now he's going to do something that he's been doing previously, like even in FPL games, like those types of spots where he's, be your cat on Mirage, be your on Dust 2, secondary op positions, or on T side, he'd be like in the more extremity lurky positions as opposed to like with the pack. And I think that's something that he's more comfortable with anyway. So I think that's going to help him maybe potentially. And then Lee, he's a player that would help with. I think his comms are really good, and I think people really undervalue comms. I think he does a lot of things where if we're going a different direction, he will keep up the pressure or mask what we're doing so the teams can't easily super read what we're doing. He'll go in like first on any strat that we need, like a dedicated first person going in, stuff like that. So selfless in that regard. Helps with adjustments. Can do like solo spots on CT side, like the solo anchor positions, like A on Mirage, hit on Inferno, for example. Just positions where we can leave him to just anchor it and make his own decisions, and help with I guess adjustments on the team if we need to make adjustments with regards to T side or CT side. Or in fact, you should probably speak up a little bit more. I think he has some good ideas that he doesn't always say for one reason or the other, and I think that even in a recent match, it was against MIBR actually. He was just like, "Why are we doing this? It's obvious that they're doing this. We should do this." And I think that was really helpful because I was tunnel visioning a little bit, and I think that's something that he could do more of because it could be a really big benefit to the team.
Nice. That's really positive actually. Like the whole kind of counter to the tunnel vision. That's a really good one. So from Danrel, as someone who has produced a huge amount of great educational content via YouTube, what important concepts and ideas do you see as being most poorly understood by the community?
Oh shit! Like pretty much everything.
Everything.
Like, where do I start? Concepts. I guess I'd have to be given like a example of a few concepts. Do you have any like off the top of your head, and then I could just kind of find my bearings a little bit?
Let me think. Important concepts or ideas being most poorly understood by the community. It's kind of a difficult one for me actually as well, because I don't feel like I'm kind of necessarily dialed in onto the pulse of like what ideas the
What the
community
scene feels.
exactly, because I'm not really like playing also let's say in the like high level pugs and stuff like that. So I don't feel like I have a really good understanding of what those kinds of players think about.
So the first thing that pops in my head is thinking about round scores. Like it's not going to be like a 16-0 every game. You can't call a perfect game, and even if you do call like the most perfect game you could potentially call, it can still be a close game because you have to understand like the other teams also with the potential to call a perfect game. Like what happens if two teams call perfect games? It comes down to a lot of factors like individual performance. Like some guy that hits like the most insane 3K that it'll happen once a month, and another player that whiffs like an easy kill on some guy's back or something, and that'll happen like once a week. And there's so many factors that go into how a game will play out and the score line and everything. There's going to be one team that wins a super huge force buy on whether it be round 2 or round 8, and it's a huge swing round because the other team now has to like force buy, eco, and then do a shitty gun round buy, and that has a huge impact on the game that changes the outcome of everything. Or this guy hits this most insane like 1 second timing window where some guy had just like they're watching lower on train and they just go to jiggle upper, and then in that moment they walk out lower or something like that, and then by the time the guy's able to peek lower again, like the T's already out. And it's like these things happen in CS all the time that you can't always expect to just 16-0 everyone, because there's nothing like there's always going to be a hole. There's always going to be like an individual play that makes or breaks a team. There's so many things that go into it, and I feel like a lot of people are just like thinking about like when it comes to perfection or something, it comes down to like, oh, perfection means winning every round. No, perfection means doing the best you can with the information that you have at hand and being able to constantly just make the best decisions from there on out, and knowing that it might not work.
Yeah, so that's actually, so there's a few. I think I have a few ones actually now. I had some. You bought me some time to think. I think one thing that I've noticed, at least even up to probably semi-pro level. Again, I can't really speak to the pro level as I'm not really playing with those players, and I don't really have time to do that. But I think rotations are something that, whilst a lot of people have some understanding of them, I feel like that's an understanding that's a little bit too surface level, and it really impacts pretty much everything. The entire game is about rotations effectively. So I think that's one I would throw in there. And also I think outcome. I think outcome is heavily misunderstood as a concept by most people, because generally speaking, most players lean towards outcome as their primary learning resource. And that's a huge issue, because outcome is not it's not your teacher whatsoever. It should never be your teacher. It's a terrible teacher.
Results oriented thinking.
Exactly. So those are pretty, and to be honest, that's definitely a lot of my content. I speak to that kind of stuff. So that's definitely something I see all the time. But right, the next question we have, let's see. Yes, Sten Ove Soland asks you, what was filming the Don't Throw Matches PSA like, and whose idea was it?
It was the idea of Ken Chen, also known as Hotbid. He works with Beyond the Summit. I think he's still with them. He's been with them for as long as I have known Beyond the Summit. I think he does a lot of the content pieces, ideas for Beyond the Summit. So he asked if I'd be okay with it. I said yes, and then he put together the script and everything, and said like, this is how it's going to be done. I didn't do we had to do a lot of takes because my delivery wasn't good in that at all. So we did a lot of takes to get the final product. But I thought the idea was funny. I thought it was going to be good, and I was happy to do it. And yeah.
It was amazing. So I think we're all glad you did.
Yeah.
So the final question from Twitter, from Mikhail. What do professionals do when they have team practices? I have played since 2015, and never have I heard anything concrete about pro teams and what they're doing inside a practice game when they're playing each other.
A practice game or during practices? Because those are two very different things. So if he's asking for practices, then I think it varies from team to team. It can vary between doing some general server theory work where you potentially do thought experiments, or maybe it's something where you go into server and you do you create setups on CG side and tactics on T side. It could be dry running those T side tactics, which means that you're going through all the motions against no opponents just to make sure that everyone's doing the right stuff out of spawn, the smokes and flashes are lighting at the right time, no one's bumping into each other, just so that you kind of rehearse it. So when you play it in a match or a scrim, that everyone knows what they're doing, they know their roles, they practice it, they remember the lineups, they're able to line things up quickly and more efficiently. It could be that they do in-house drills. So let's say I'm a B player in Inferno, and my other B player with me were terrible at holding passive B, especially for low nades. So I want the other 3 players on the team plus the coach to basically do different types of B hits on me, just so that I can practice against pops with just like a flash pop, or walk-in contact with an op, or walk-in contact with rifles, or full execute with smokes and mollies. So all of those can be in a team practice. It could be a game review. So with my team, both myself and our coach will record an OBS our games with our comms. So if there's ever a period in time where we have a scrimmage or a match and we need to go back and review it to just learn from it, we have not only the gameplay that, if it's a practice game, you might not have a GoTV demo because the other team probably is going to say, no, we don't want you to have GoTV. So the only way that you can have your perspective is if you record it, but it has the added benefit of having the voice comms as well. So you can say, what happened in this round? Oh, well, this is what this person was calling. This person didn't hear this, or, this comm was too, you were speaking with a sense of urgency when there was no urgency. You repeated your call and you were yelling it 5 times. Like, there's all these things that you can pick up from communication where you can, that's a skill. Communication is a skill, and it's something that needs to be practiced, and it needs to be something that you review. So you have these game review sessions. You have your practice scrimmages. You have your deathmatch things that you maybe just go and deathmatch together, or do like aim redline or something, 2v2 against each other. All these things are things that you can do in practice days.
Awesome. Well, there's no more questions. So I think this is a good stopping point. Thanks so much. We're coming in on an hour and a half as well. So, thanks so much for kind of giving me your time. And I'm certain I'm going to be knocking at your door, asking you for another episode at some point. So cheers, Josh.
Thank you.